We've got Robert Good. We've got Scott Bowley, Chloe Curry, me, MOOGZ, or Matthew. So we are here in the studio, Scott's studio, in the Rising Sun.
Yeah, this is where a lot of music creation happens. Right here, over there more, on that side of the room. Mm-hmm. This is where the sitting happens. This is where the discussing happens.
The music.
The talking. The pre-music and the post-music.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's it.
That's it. So in this case, our instruments are actually instruments of, one is of capitalism, one is of not death but dance.
Yeah.
Dance, yeah. Yeah.
So Chloe, do you want to give us an introduction to
the sword?
This hardcore piece?
So I decided to refine my craft. I'm a dancer, a burlesque dancer. And typically I've been choosing sci-fi concepts. But this time round, I decided to learn sword fighting and get those skills on board since, lockdown happened. It's all very boring. How am I going to fend for myself? Well, there we go.
No one's going to get those toilet rolls off your nads.
Absolutely, I'll be slashing your handbags and... Anyway. So that's what I've got a picture of, a British short sword, and I'll eventually use it in my shows when I actually get to perform again, but Christ knows when that'll be.
Yeah, so I think having the spectre of violence present in our chat room for HEIST is like a really interesting dimension because the nature of being in like a hacker environment is that it's potentially dangerous. So it's like this symbolism of violence turned into text is kind of going to be a symbol for the kind of violence that internet violence that would otherwise be happening in a real hacker environment. And so when we present these, like a weapon like this as a piece of, like, essentially reduced to text, we're describing what is a weapon by portraying it. And the notion of like having our money gun as well here, like what do you reckon are we saying with our money gun?
Well, it's a counterfeit money gun.
Perfect.
It's a counterfeit money gun. It's not real Supreme. It's still a fascinating object in itself as a sort of representation of capitalism and a sort of it's a fascinating thing, but then to have a rip-off of it that isn't real, it makes it the money inside is fake, but it was bought with money. So someone's actually bought fake money, which is kind of interesting to me. And
it's got real weight on the dark web, actually.
Yeah.
Buying fake money is up there.
And I think the fact it's a gun as well, it was interesting you talking earlier about are hackers almost like soldiers, right? And I do think your answer was no.
Yeah.
But the more you talked about it did start to sound a little bit like yes.
Yeah.
And I get why you said no, because it's you're one of the good hackers, right? You're doing it for reasons that aren't about greed or taking from anything. You're showing people how they may be vulnerable, and you're using that hacking knowledge for something that's actually good.
Yeah, it is a weapon, ultimately. So by presenting like weapons in a benevolent light and being like, well, they are dangerous. That sword is definitely dangerous.
It is.
However, in the hands of a capable operator, it's actually for the benefit of the people who know that it's there.
Yes. Yeah. I'll be cutting my clothes off with it. That's the eventual plan. It'll be quite a show.
And then, of course, should we talk about counterfeit stuff separately? Should we focus specifically on...
I reckon, talking about counterfeiting is definitely hot on our agenda.
Yeah.
In terms of like just to round off our weapons,
Yeah.
Robert, your weapon I feel is language.
So yes, I'm interested in text and language, and you invited me to come along to this. So I'm really intrigued by the whole idea of hacking. It's a completely new world to me, and it's kind of different, and it's kind of not. I'm interested in taking words and texts as my source material. So I think of text as being like tubes of paint. You squeeze them out and you kind of create with them. So they're kind of fluid bodies that you can then manipulate in different ways. And I'm interested in the way in which text and knowledge has moved from the printed page, which is kind of very analog, into the digital environment and into the internet. And taking news feeds and the information that is provided to me and taking that as my starting point. So that all interests me, but from the point of view of a almost a spectator on the outside. I'm not kind of trying to game them. I'm trying to take what they offer me and see what does that amount to, what is that all about. So it's a slightly different way into the thing, but there are overlaps in the sense that technically the copyright and the legality around moving anything around on the internet is very skewed against you as an individual, and who owns what and what you're allowed to do with images and data and text is very constrained, I think. But anyway, so my piece that I think I'm intrigued to see what you're going to do with is an early piece called Affirmative Action, which was I think I took a NASA astronaut diagram of one of the early Apollo missions and the spacesuit, and I just replaced all the diagrammatic information with the word yes as a kind of affirmative statement about the whole project. Anyway, so there we go. So that's, I'm interested also because it's already a very kind of text-based piece, so I'm not sure how much further it can be transformed. In other words, if you took an image and you turn it into ASCII code, and I've seen some of the things that you've been doing and they look fantastic, but you're taking a visual hit and turning it into kind of codified form, whereas these, a lot of it is already text. There's already text out. What you can do with the word yes, except to kind of put yes again, I don't know, but we'll find out.
Yeah.
All will be revealed.
All will be revealed.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting is like the concept of volume is introduced into the text in terms of, for example, with this, when we turn this, the image of this into ASCII, we can clearly see Supreme. So the volume of the brand is very loud. When the volume of the text is very small, it becomes indecipherable. It becomes a series of symbols and is reduced to essentially meaninglessness. So it stops having the relevance which it intended to. So, for example, even just the yes just becomes a bunch of symbols that they represent what used to be a yes, but is now just actually, it's just almost just an arrow. It's like diagrammatically pointing at the part of the astronaut outfit.
So a passive yes.
It's a passive yes. Yeah. It's a retrospective and passive yes. It's like, yeah, I used to be like that. I used to be affirmative. I used to be a word.
It's like a
Post yes.
Yeah, post yes.
Hey, that's great. We've transcended
yes,
yeah. Brilliant. Transcended yes.
And what's behind that act of translation that you're interested in doing by taking a piece of visual culture and cranking it through your system? What's the idea behind that?
What's the idea?
Sorry, you should be asking the question.
Yeah, crack on. So I think it's introducing a whole notion of like essentially what is like internet graffiti. So like I first started creating versions of my hacker handle MOOGZ in ASCII like when I was probably 15, in the same way that I would have attempted graffiti, have been very bad at it, and was like, okay, just like with skateboarding, I tried it once and I'm like, I'm rubbish at this, I'm going to be happily rubbish at it, and I just wrote it off. But in ASCII I was able to really articulate what I meant to portray, and it would be like like for example with MOOGZ, I could put eyes in there and I could create a little smiley face from my name MOOGZ, and I think that was something which a lot of hackers were drawn to, like the maximization of resources. So with very limited resources, how much can we express? And from that being ingrained into kind of my aesthetic landscape at that age, I feel like that hasn't changed as well, which is the most interesting part for me, is that like I've been on the aesthetic of what we're going to see with HEIST, which is like green text on black in a chat room. I've been doing that for time immemorial for me, and it's really interesting to see the connection for the mainstream people who would never have seen this kind of aesthetic otherwise, to be introduced to it. And then it's kind of an exaggeration of our creation of work. So as like the software pirates have been doing for a long time, is they make ASCII art to basically show off how skilled they are. So they're like, we cracked the software and we've also made this artwork to go with it, which is very cool. It's a bit like with modern music production software. They will make incredible music for the loading page, right? Because they're like, yeah, we cracked it and we're also very creative. So it's an exaggeration on that point. And it's like, what are the limits of what can be expressed in text when we have a visual source? So for example, like a photograph of a piece of writing converted into ASCII would be a representation of the light of the room, and it wouldn't actually be about the meaning of the text anymore. So I think it's like removing that element of orchestration and control which led to the original ASCII art scene, and then just mitigating it and being like, well, we're now at the mercy of light. We're at the mercy of the same things that all visual artworks are, like our experience of them, which is our responsiveness rather than our prediction and control mechanisms of engaging with something, which with an experiential thing like being outside of your comfort zone. Like, I'm on a website, but it's not a website. It's a Linux operating system in a chat room full of hackers. Where am I? What's going on here? And like presenting things which would otherwise be normal in a gallery in a space which is definitely not normal. But it is to me. So it's I think that's my motivation there, I reckon, just to like bridge that gap between kind of the civilian world and like the hacker world, but by using art as a bridge and by using visual communication.
It's interesting that you mentioned the soundtracks that some hackers create for when you download a crack of whatever, some kind of piece of software or whatever. And not that I've ever done it, of course. And I think it's an interesting performance space that they've set up there when you see that coming through, and you might not be expecting it, but suddenly you are forced to listen to this piece of work, to this piece of music. I mean, what would you call that? A sort of audio tag, or I'm not sure if the different hackers have their own that they'll always use, or is it just a kind of, this time we're going to play this piece that we've made?
So the aesthetic for a given, it would be a group. So a group would release something being like cracked software, or it could be a zine. And the aesthetic of the text file, because it was always text. This is the thing. When I was 15, I was printing out text files off the internet, and I had them in a little thing binder, right? And the aesthetic of a given group or a zine would be like on the front page, you can see how much effort has been put into it, and like just like with the music production cracking groups, like their compositional skills are really good. And what I find really interesting is what happens if you take the recordings of all of those compositions, put that together in an album and release it. Who owns it? Like, whose copyright is it? So that's another like play, and like, well, they would probably have something to say about that, and I'm actually quite interested what they would say, like, because they deserve a platform, but of course they have to be anonymous enough that they can't quite,
Yeah, so that must be really infuriating, because presumably if they've made a track and they want to show it to the world, which they clearly do because they're forcing it on people. Is it any different from when Apple put that U2 album on every iPod?
Oh my god, that was
Are they any better than that?
Christ.
But then if they were to upload that in on a legitimate platform, Spotify, iTunes, whatever, then people would be able to figure out who these people are through that. So it would be a way in, wouldn't it? It'd be a back door that they've just created for themselves.
It'd be a forensic artifact. The actual composition would be an admission of guilt of copyright theft.
Yeah.
And of breaking the agreement, reverse engineering, and essentially saying, hands up, that was me, but please listen to my work. Please pay attention.
Yeah.
Bono fully hacked us that time, didn't he? God, it was awful. I actually feel a bit annoyed now.
It feels solid.
Yeah.
At least with the cracking groups, like it's really...
At least they're cool.
Yeah, at least they're cool. That's...
Bono's not cool.